and arduous recoveries, volunteer to return to the battlefield, to finish their mission. I urge our colleagues to oppose this dangerous resolution, and, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentlewoman reserves her time. Gentleman from Ohio.
I yield myself 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized.
In the next 2 hours, we're going to demonstrate that the American people oppose this war by a margin of 2 to 1. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this Washington Post poll that was published on March 15th, saying nearly 2/3 of Americans say the war isn't worth fighting.
Without objection, so ordered.
In the next 2 hours, we're going to demonstrate that we're spending $100 billion per year on this war. There are those who are saying the war could last at least another 10 years. Are we willing to spend another $1 trillion on a war that doesn't have any exit plan, for which there is no time frame to get out, no end game, where we haven't defined our mission? The question is not whether we can afford to leave. The question is, can we afford to stay? And I submit we cannot afford to stay. In the next 2 hours, we are going to demonstrate that the counterintelligence strategy of General Petraeus is an abysmal failure, and it needs to be called as such. So I want to conclude this part of my presentation with a unanimous consent to put into the record an article by Thomas Friedman in the New York Times, and I quote, says, "What are we doing spending $110 billion this year supporting corrupt and unpopular regimes in Afghanistan and Pakistan that are almost identical to the governments we're applauding the Arab people for overthrowing?"
Without objection, so
I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, Mr. Smith of Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this resolution, and I do so as one who does firmly believe that we need to, as soon as we responsibly can, end our military engagement in Afghanistan. The cost is very real. I represent Joint Base Lewis-McChord, which includes Fort Lewis Army Base, and we have lost many soldiers in Afghanistan. The families understand the cost. We need to wind down this war as quickly and as responsibly as we can. Unfortunately, this resolution does not give us the opportunity to do that. And we have clear national security interests in Afghanistan. While I may agree with many of the statements about the troubles and challenges that we face in that region, the one thing that you will hear today that I cannot agree with is the idea that we have no national security interests in Afghanistan and Pakistan, or that we somehow do not have a clear mission. We have a clear mission. We do not want the Taliban and their al-Qaeda allies back in charge of Afghanistan or any significant part of Afghanistan from which they could plot attacks against us, as they are still trying to do in the parts of Pakistan that they're in. We need to get an Afghanistan government that can stand up, and they're going to need our help to get there. Now, there are many who have argued, and I'm sure some on both sides of the aisle, who would be sympathetic with the notion that we need to reduce our commitment there, that a full-scale counterinsurgency effort or 100,000 U.S. troops and 150,000 NATO and U.S. troops combined is too much. Let's go with a much lighter footprint. Many have advocated that. Focuses on counterterrorism, focuses on going after the terrorists, and allows the Afghans to take the lead on everything else. And there's a plausible argument for that. This resolution does not allow that. I want the members of this chamber to understand this resolution requires complete withdrawal of all U.S. forces by the end of this year, and I can tell you, as the ranking member on the Armed Services Committee, that is not in the national security interests of this country. We may have a legitimate debate about what our presence should be, how we should change it. Can I have an additional 30 seconds, please? I'm sorry.
Yield the gentleman an additional minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
But the notion that we can simply walk away from this problem, as Ms. Ross-Layton pointed out, is simply not true. And it is a problem, believe me, I, as much as anyone in this body, would love to be able to walk away from. It is an enormous challenge. And what Mr. Friedman has to say about the governments of Afghanistan and Pakistan is spot on. But the problem is we can't simply walk away from them and let them fall because of the national security implications that has for us right here at home, given what the Taliban and al-Qaeda would plan. I am all in favor of more reasonable plans for how we go forward in Afghanistan, but simply heading for the hills and leaving is not a responsible plan. It's not even really a plan for how to deal with the very difficult challenges that we face in that region, and I urge this body to oppose this resolution. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I want to thank the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich, for giving me half his time. Mr. Speaker, we are debating how long are we going to be in Afghanistan. Recently, Secretary Gates testified before the Armed Services Committee, which I serve on, and said that he thought by 2014 we could start substantial reduction in our troop strength in Afghanistan, 2014. Then it might be 2015, 2016. That's why this debate and this resolution is so important. Not important for those of us in the House, but important for our military and the American people. And Mr. Kucinich did make reference to the Washington Post ABC poll that was taken a couple of days ago that said 73% of the American people said it's time this year to bring our troops home. In addition, I would like to share a quote from the leader of Afghanistan, Mr. Karzai. He's our man in Afghanistan. All right, now, he's our man. This was his quote 3 days ago. I request that NATO and America should start these operations on our soil, Karzai said. This war is not on our soil. If this war is against terror, then this war is not here. Terror is not here. The number of al-Qaeda and their presence in Afghanistan is about 20 or 30. Most of them are in Pakistan, I would agree with that. But this debate is critical. I want to, before I reserve the balance of my time, I want to share very quickly a letter from a retired colonel who's a Marine that lives in my district. I am writing this letter to express my concern over the current Afghanistan war. I am a retired Marine officer with 31-plus years of active duty. I retired in 2004 due to service limitations, or I'm sure I would have been on my third or fourth deployment by now to a war that has gone on too long. And I'll go to the bottom of this. It makes no sense if we're there 4 years or 40, the results will be the same. And he closed his letter this way. This war is costing the United States billions of dollars a month to wage, and we still continue to get more young Americans killed. The Afghan war has no end state for us. I urge you to make contact with all the current and newly elected men and women in Congress and ask them to end this war and bring our young men and women home. If any of my comments will assist in this effort, you are welcome to use them and my name. Respectfully, Dennis G. Adams, Lieutenant Colonel, retired United States Marine Corps. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Ohio.
I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Woolsey.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in absolute support of the resolution offered by the gentleman from Ohio. The war in Afghanistan, almost 10 years old, has been an utter failure in every possible way. It hasn't eliminated the terrorist threat. It hasn't destroyed the Taliban. It hasn't advanced national security objectives. It hasn't promoted a vibrant democracy in Afghanistan. It hasn't done any of the things it was supposed to do. And General Petraeus' testimony this week didn't inspire much confidence either. He continues to offer the same vague reassurances about progress we've supposedly made, while being sure to say that challenges remain, so he can continue justifying a substantial troop presence in Afghanistan. But I'm not reassured in the least. And much more importantly, the American people aren't reassured. After 9.5 years, after seeing 1,500 of their fellow citizens killed, after writing a check to the tune of $386 billion, they've had enough. They are angry. They are frustrated. As well they should be. A new poll shows that nearly two-thirds of Americans, 64%, think the war isn't worth fighting. This is one of the least popular things our government is doing, and yet it's just about the only one Republicans don't want to cut. I think it's about time the People's House listened to the people on the issue of war and peace and life and death. We need to negotiate, and we need to sign a status of forces agreement, SOFA, with Afghanistan. We need to move quickly toward the massive redeployment in July, as the President promised more than a year ago. In the name of moral decency, fiscal sanity, and constitutional integrity, it's time to bring our troops home. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. McKeon, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, it is important to underscore, as Undersecretary of Defense Michelle Flournoy has, that to withdraw from Afghanistan at this time, before we finish the job, is to pave the way for the next 9/11. She and other U.S. and allied officials note that we need look no further than the example of Ahmad Sadiqi, a 36-year-old German of Afghan origin who U.S. interrogators talked to, and he revealed the Osama bin Laden was planning an attack on Europe. Without our boots on the ground in Afghanistan, the plot against Europe might never have been uncovered. Without our boots on the ground, we will not be able to stop the next wave of attack against our homeland, our citizens, our families, and ourselves. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. McKeon, the esteemed chairman of the House Armed Services Committee.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I join with my colleagues from the Foreign Services Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, and my colleagues from the Armed Services Committee in opposition to this resolution. This resolution would undermine the efforts of our military commanders and troops as they work side by side with their Afghan and coalition partners. Yesterday, in his testimony before the House Armed Services Committee, General Petraeus, commander of the U.S. and allied forces in Afghanistan, described significant progress made by our troops and Afghan forces. But while the United States is on track to accomplish our objectives by 2014, the general also warned that this hard-fought progress is fragile and reversible, and he urged that continued support from this Congress for our mission in Afghanistan is vital to success. When asked specifically how our troops and enemies would view the resolution before us today, General Petraeus stated, "The Taliban and al-Qaeda obviously would trumpet this as a victory. Needless to say, it would completely undermine everything our troopers have fought so much and sacrificed so much for." Mr. Speaker, when the President authorized a surge of 30,000 additional troops, he reminded us of why we are in Afghanistan. It's the epicenter of where al-Qaeda planned and launched the 9/11 attacks against innocent Americans. It remains vital to the national security of this country to prohibit the Taliban from once again providing sanctuary to al-Qaeda leaders. Moreover, withdrawing before completing our mission would reinforce extremist propaganda that Americans are weak and unreliable allies and could facilitate extremist recruiting and future attacks. Like most Republicans, I supported the President's decision to surge in Afghanistan. I believe that with additional forces, combined with giving General Petraeus the time, space, and resources he needs, we can win this conflict. During a visit last week with our troops in Afghanistan, Secretary Gates observed, "The closer you get to this fight, the better it looks." Having just returned myself from Afghanistan a few weeks ago, I couldn't agree more. Our delegation to Afghanistan met with senior military commanders and diplomats, talked to airmen at Bagram, Marines in Helmand, and soldiers in Kandahar. It was clear to our delegation that our forces have made significant gains and have reversed the Taliban's momentum. Our forces and their Afghan partners have cleared enemy strongholds, swept up significant weapons caches, and given more Afghans the confidence to defy the Taliban. We've made considerable progress in growing and professionalizing the Afghanistan's army and police so these forces are more capable and reliable partners to our own troops. As significant as our troops' achievements in the fields are, they can easily be undone by poor decisions made here in Washington. Today's debate is not being conducted on vacuum. Our troops are listening. Our allies are listening.
The gentleman is given an additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized for 30
I thank
seconds.
the gentlelady and the Speaker. The Taliban and al-Qaeda also are listening. And finally, the Afghan people are listening. Mr. Speaker, I want to send a clear message to the Afghan people and government that our coalition partners, our military men and women, that this Congress will stand firm in our commitment to free us from the problems that the Taliban created for us on 9/11. We will not have this sanctuary ever happen again, and I urge my colleagues to vote no on this resolution.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Ohio.
Okay. I think it's Mr.
It's Ileana's time.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
So, fill the vacuum. Mr. Chairman, I rise in I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I rise in opposition to the resolution. Mr. Chairman, this is the third debate we've had pursuant to a War Powers resolution in the last year. I completely agree with the gentleman from Ohio that as we're moving into the 10th year of this conflict, it is critical, not just nice, it's really critical for the House to have an open and honest debate on the merits of our ongoing military operations in Afghanistan, and that debate should be outside of the context of a defense spending bill. But what I also do is take strong issue with the invocation of Section 5C of the War Powers Act as the basis for this debate. If we are here to respect the law and the procedures, you have to remember that it is that section which authorizes a privileged resolution, like the one we have before us today, to require the withdrawal of U.S. forces when they are engaged in hostilities, and Congress has not authorized the use of military force. There may be aspects of our operations around the world that people can claim under Section 5C have not been authorized. No one can make a contention that what we are now doing in Afghanistan was not authorized by the Congress. There can be no doubt this military action in Afghanistan was authorized. It was authorized in 2001, soon after 9/11. But let's set aside the procedure and the specific dictates of the statute. I do think and share here the concerns well articulated by the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, that it's not responsible to demand a complete withdrawal of our troops from Afghanistan by the end of the year without regard to the consequence of our withdrawal, without regard to the situation on the ground, including efforts to promote economic development and expand the rule of law, and without any measurement of whether the current strategy is indeed working. I'm very sensitive to the arguments posed by the gentleman from Ohio. The cost of human life due to the war and the heavy costs incurred by our country at a time of great economic hardship should give any member of Congress pause. I'm also keenly aware of the concerns regarding our overall U.S. strategy in Afghanistan. It remains to be seen whether a counterinsurgency strategy will succeed there, and equally important, whether the Afghans are taking sufficient responsibility for this war. I'm troubled that the war very much remains an American-led effort and that the U.S. presence has created a culture of dependency in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, I won't support, but notwithstanding all that, I will not support a call for a full withdrawal until we give the President's strategy additional time, at least through the spring, to show results or without a responsible withdrawal strategy to ensure gains made thus far will not be lost. A number of positive developments make me unwilling to throw in the towel just yet. For example, as noted by General Petraeus in testimony yesterday, coalition forces have been making some progress against Taliban forces in southern Afghanistan. In addition, the training of Afghan security forces has exceeded targets, and we are inching slowly toward the point at which they may be able to secure their own borders. A final plea to my colleagues, and that's to some of my colleagues who are joining me in opposing this resolution. We are not going to succeed, I'm sure we're not going to succeed in Afghanistan unless our civilian efforts are fully resourced. When I traveled to Afghanistan last April, I was encouraged to see our military forces, diplomats, and development experts working closely together in the field. General Petraeus couldn't have been more clear in his testimony. We are setting ourselves up for failure if we fully fund the clear part of the President's counterinsurgency strategy, the part carried out by the military, but shortchange the hold and build portions of the strategy, like economic development and building good governance. These are the keys to lasting success in Afghanistan. These are the keys to a successful counterinsurgency strategy. And when we meet those tests and do those works, we may be able to create the environment that will allow our troops to return home. For all of these reasons, I oppose the resolution, reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, sir. Before I yield time, I don't know why we'll be debating this probably in 2015 or 16. If I'm not here, somebody else will be, because that's how long we're going to be there. This general that served in the Marine Corps that has advised me for 11 months back in November, I said, what do you think about 4 more years? I'm just going to read part of his email. I do not believe that 40 more years would guarantee victory, whatever that is, so 4 will do nothing. The war is costing money and lives all in short supply. I would like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Tennessee, Jimmy Duncan.
Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I rise in strong support of this resolution. And first, I want to thank the gentleman from North Carolina for yielding me this time, and I want to pay tribute to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, who is one of the kindest, most sincere, and most courageous members that we have in this body. I voted, Mr. Chairman, for this war, but I sure didn't vote for a 10-year war or forever or a permanent or endless war. There's nothing fiscally conservative about this war, and I think conservatives should be the people most horrified by this war. Alfred Regnery, the publisher of the conservative American Spectator magazine, wrote last October, quote, "Afghanistan has little strategic value, and the war is one of choice rather than necessity." And he added that it has, quote, "been a wasteful and frustrating decade." The worst thing about Iraq and Afghanistan, or certainly Afghanistan, is both wars really, is all the young people who have been killed, but it is also very sad, Mr. Chairman, that we spent hundreds of billions of dollars, in fact some estimates 2 or 3 trillion now in direct and indirect costs to carry on these 2 very unnecessary wars. Our Constitution does not give us the authority to run another country, and that's basically what we've been doing. We've been doing more nation building and more civilian functions than anything else, and we've been turning the Department of Defense, at least in Iraq and Afghanistan, we've turned the Department of Defense into the Department of Foreign Aid. I had a conservative Republican elected official from my district in my office this past Monday. His son is in Afghanistan in the Army, and he said he asked his son recently what we were accomplishing there. And he said, his son said, "Dad, we're accomplishing nothing." We seem to be making the same mistakes in our policies toward Afghanistan that we made in Iraq. Even General Petraeus has said some time ago that we should never forget that Afghanistan has been known as the, quote, "graveyard of empires." George C. Wilson, a military columnist for the Congress Daily, wrote a few months ago, "The American military's mission to pacify the 40,000 tiny villages in Afghanistan will look like Mission Impossible, especially if our bombings keep killing Afghan civilians and infuriating the ones who survived." The Center for Defense Information said late last year, we have now spent $439.8 billion on war and war-related costs in Afghanistan and $1.63 trillion so far on the war and war-related costs in Iraq. As I said a moment ago, these figures should astound fiscal conservatives. Georgiana Geyer, a syndicated columnist, wrote a few years ago, "Critics of the war have said since the beginning of the conflict that Americans, still strangely complacent about overseas wars being waged by minorities in their name, will inevitably come to a point where they will see they have to have a government that provides services at home or one that seeks empire across the globe." I just finished, Mr. Chairman, a few weeks ago, doing field hearings around the country in relation to the transportation, the highway bill. At each stop, and these were done in Oklahoma and Arkansas and West Virginia and West Tennessee, very conservative districts. And in each of those places I said that it's time that we stop spending hundreds of billions on these unnecessary foreign wars and stop rebuilding in Iraq and Afghanistan and start rebuilding the United States of America. And each of those conservative districts, the people erupted into applause. Only 31% of the American people, according to the latest ABC Newsweek poll that just came out, think this war is still worth it. William F. Buckley, the conservative icon, wrote a few years ago he supported the war in Iraq and then he became disillusioned by it. And he wrote these words. He said, "A respect for the power of the United States is engendered by our success in engagements in which we take part. A point is reached when tenacity conveys..." Can I have 30 seconds more?
Please give the gentleman 30 seconds more.
The gentleman is recognized for 30 additional seconds.
William Buckley said, "A point is reached when tenacity conveys not steadfastness of purpose, but misapplication of pride." President Karzai last year told ABC News he wanted us to stay there another 15 or 20 more years. That's because he wants our money. This war is more about money and power. Every gigantic bureaucracy always wants more money, but this war has gone too far and too long, and I support this resolution.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Ohio. Gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I yield to Mr. Shabbat, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend the remarks and include extraneous material on House Con Resolution 28. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Middle East and South Asia.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman
Thank
from
you,
Ohio.
Madam Chair, and thank you for your steadfast commitment to the men and women who gallantly serve our country on the battlefield. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the resolution. First, let me get one argument out of the way. I've heard before some of my colleagues who support an American retreat from Afghanistan describe this effort as a fiscal matter. I'd respond to that argument by simply stating that it's not a question of whether we can afford to fund a military presence in Afghanistan. It's a matter of whether we can afford not to, particularly at this point. I think my colleagues know that I'm very uncomfortable spending taxpayer dollars without a solid justification, and I'd match my fiscal conservative credentials with anybody in this body. But when it comes to national security and when it comes to the care and protection of our troops in harm's way, we must not be, to use a phrase that you often hear on this floor, penny wise and pound foolish. Further, a premature withdrawal of American troops from the Afghan theater would send a terrible message to both our friends and also to our adversaries, to our allies in the war on terrorism, whom we would leave essentially twisting in the wind, to those 47 other nations that have joined the coalition in Afghanistan. We would essentially be saying, good luck, you're on your own. Not exactly what they had in mind when they joined us in this fight. And of course to al-Qaeda and to the Taliban, whom we would embolden by adopting this ill-advised resolution, we'd be providing once again the sanctuary which they enjoyed in Afghanistan before our armed forces reversed their momentum. I don't often find myself in agreement with President Obama's policies, but I did agree with him when he said a little more than a year ago, and I quote, "I am convinced that our security is at stake in Afghanistan and Pakistan. This is the epicenter of violent extremism practiced by al-Qaeda. It is from here that we were attacked on 9/11, and it is here that new attacks are being plotted as I speak," unquote. That was President Obama. I also agree with General Petraeus, who said last week that, quote, "Our core objective in Afghanistan, needless to say, is to ensure that the country does not become a sanctuary once again for al-Qaeda the way it was prior to 9/11, unquote. I know memories fade with time, but it's been not quite 10 years since 3,000 lives were lost on American soil in New York, in Pennsylvania, and just minutes from here down the street at the Pentagon. Let's not forget what al-Qaeda did then, and let's keep working to prevent it from happening again. Let's not quit until the job's done. Vote no on this resolution. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Ohio.
I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a report from the United Nations that says that 2010 was the worst year for civilian casualties in Afghanistan.
Without objection, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a recent report by the UN that states that nearly 3,000 civilians were killed last year in Afghanistan.
Without objection, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent to put into the record a report from the Afghanistan Rights Monitor relating to the number of civilians killed and wounded and displaced.
Without objection, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent to put into the record a report from the Congressional Research Service that the war in Afghanistan has cost over $454 billion to date.
Without objection, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent to put into the record an article by Nobel Prize-winning economists Joseph Stiglitz and Linda Bilmes in the Washington Post that says there is no question the Iraq war added substantially to the federal debt.
Without objection, so ordered.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Barney Frank.
Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, first, any suggestion that this is any way disrespectful of the sacrifice of our troops is nonsense. Saying that we do not want brave Americans to continue in a very difficult situation in which they are at a great disadvantage and that, in fact, we would like to bring them home is no criticism of them at all. And nothing undermines their ability to be there. There is a policy decision as to whether they should be there. Now, my friend from Washington, my friend from California have said, well, this isn't the right forum parliamentarily. And my friend from Washington said, yes, we should have a change in strategy, but not this way. But this is all we've got. Right now, the members have a choice, and that's the way this place is now being run. Either you vote for this resolution, or you vote it down, and you give an implicit, and in some cases explicit, approval to the administration to stay there indefinitely. General Petraeus said the other day he sees us jointly there with the Afghans well after 2014. Now, yes, there is some gain we could get in deterring terrorism there, although the notion that if we stop terrorism in Afghanistan, that's going to be the end of it, when there are, unfortunately, other places in the world, Somalia, Sudan, Yemen, elsewhere, we can't plug every hole in the world. And in fact, this is an effort that, having been tried for 10 years, has not, unfortunately, looked to me like it's going to succeed. We're told, well, but this was important because we deterred an attack on Europe. Well, where were the Europeans? The thing that most astounded me today was when my friend from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat, said, well, what about our 47 coalition partners? What about them? They're sitting this one out. They're pulling out. This is a virtually unilateral American action with a couple of flags that we fly from a few other countries. Some of them did have people there, and they've suffered casualties. But they're all withdrawing, leaving us alone. And then let's talk about the cost of this war. The gentleman from Ohio said it's not a fiscal issue. Of course it is. This war costs us well over $100 billion a year. And you will see Americans die from a lack of police and fire and public safety here if you continue to fund this futile war.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from North Carolina.
Yes, Mr. Berman.
Gentleman from California.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from North
I'd
Carolina.
like to come down to the floor. Mr. Speaker, I am grateful that we're having this debate from both sides, those that want to stay there for another 4 or 5 years versus those of us who would like to bring our troops home. I want to put a face on this debate, if I may, Mr. Speaker. This young man's name is Tyler Jordan from Cincinnati, Ohio. He is attending his father's funeral. He was a gunny sergeant, Philip Jordan, who was killed for this country. The 6-year-old little boy, you can't see his eyes, but they hurt, they're pained. How many more Tyler Jordans are going to be waiting for their daddy or mom to come home to be buried if we stay there 4, 5, 6, 7 more years? And that is what has been indicated by the leadership of the military and this administration. How many more moms and dads and wives and husbands are going to be at Dover Air Force Base to receive the remains of their loved ones? That's why this debate is so important and why we need to have a date and a time to start bringing them home. My last post. This absolutely handsome couple, the Marine, worn out with PTSD, his beautiful wife Katie and his little boy, last year at Camp Lejeune, McHugh Boulevard, pulls his car over in the middle of the day and he shoots himself in the head and he kills himself. How many more Tom Bagosis will commit suicide? How many Tyler Jordans will not have their daddies coming home? How many moms and dads, wives and husbands will be at Dover to see those in a flag-draped coffin? I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chavez.
Gentleman from Utah is recognized for 3 minutes.
I'm going to be voting in favor of this amendment. The United States military is the greatest fighting force on the face of the planet. We could not be more proud of our troops who have served their country with such valor and such vigor. This is the longest war in the history of the United States of America. And let there be no mistake, the global war on terror is real. It is very real. I reject the notion that polls should matter in any way, shape, or form in this debate. That's not how the United States operates. This is not how we decide whether or not we go to war or we bring our troops home. I reject the notion that by bringing our troops home at some point, which I consider to be victory, is somehow a pathway or paving a pathway to another 9/11. I think that's offensive. I think it's inaccurate. Now, in many ways, we've had success over the course of the years. Let's understand that according to the National Intelligence Estimate, which has been printed in many newspapers, that the Taliban pose no clear and present danger to the current Afghan government, nor do they pose a danger to the United States of America. Further, we've had our CIA director state that there are less than 50 al-Qaeda entire boundaries of Afghanistan. I believe it should be the policy of the United States of America that if we send our troops to war, we go with everything we have. We do not hold back. A politically correct war is a lost war. And at the present time, we are playing politics. We aren't going with everything we have. If we're serious about doing it, Mr. President, you go with everything. And until this president attends more funerals than he does rounds of golf, this person will be highly offended. We have to define the mission. The President of the United States has failed to define success in Afghanistan. We are participating in the business of nation building, and I reject that. We are propping up a government that is fundamentally corrupt, and we all know it. It will not get us to where we want to go. We must redefine the rules of engagement. Even when I was in Afghanistan visiting with General Petraeus, he admitted that we're using smaller caliber rounds. Again, we're trying to be more politically correct instead of actually protecting American lives. Let me also say that, again, terrorism is a global threat. We must use our forces around the world when there is a direct threat on the United States of America. That is not confined to just the boundaries of Afghanistan. It is happening globally, and it is real. We have to deal with the threats in Iran. and not take our eye off the ball. And finally, I would say that our national debt is a clear and present danger to the United States of America, and we must pay attention to that. And
House is not in order. Gentlelady up in the balcony. The chair notes a disturbance in the gallery in contravention of the law and rules of the House. The Sergeant-at-Arms will remove those persons responsible for the disturbance and restore order to the gallery. Gentleman may continue.
Mr. Speaker, before I continue, may I inquire as to how much time I have left?
Gentleman has 15 seconds remaining.
Would I ask the gentleman to yield me an additional 15?
I yield the gentleman additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
Aaron Nemelka, Carlos Aragon, Nigel Olson, Matthew Wagstaff. Since I've been in office, these are the gentlemen who've lost their lives in Afghanistan. I honor them, I thank them. And as I've talked to each of their parents, they want those rules of engagement changed, and they want to end this war in Afghanistan with victory. With victory. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields his time. Gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Thornberry, who's the chairman of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Speaker, this week General Petraeus testified before Congress, and the essence of his testimony was that we are just now getting the necessary assets in place to make a difference in Afghanistan, that our troops and coalition partners are making a significant difference. The progress is fragile and reversible, but that it is essential that we keep it up because vital national interests are at stake. And I fear that as time has passed over the last 10 years and so many other events come and go in our nation's life, that it's all too easy to forget that this country was attacked on 9/11 and that 3,000 Americans lost their lives. And we could come to the floor and hold up their pictures and the pictures of their children of those who were killed on that day by terrorists. The attacks that were launched from Afghanistan, that were planned in Afghanistan and directed from Afghanistan. And this Congress at the time voted virtually unanimously that we would take military action to go make sure that Afghanistan would no longer be used as a launching pad for attacks against us, and that from Afghanistan people would no longer come here to kill Americans. That's the reason we are still there today, and that is the purpose of our military actions there today. It's true that we may have a hard time plugging all the holes that could develop somewhere in the world where terrorist groups could squirt out to, but it is also true, in my view, that if we don't plug this hole, if we don't fulfill the mission that we have set out to fulfill in Afghanistan, we're going to have more holes all over the world developing because people know that we're not serious about doing what we say, and our security will be severely affected if that happens. There have clearly been ups and downs in our military efforts there, just as there were in Iraq. But I believe that from General Petraeus on down, we have our best. They deserve our support to fulfill the mission the country has given them.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a report from the Afghanistan Study Group that says that the current U.S. military effort is helping to fuel the very insurgency we are attempting to defeat.
Without objection, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record an article by Amanda Turkel of the Huffington Post that says that military commanders expect the United States to have a significant presence in Afghanistan for another 8 to 10 years, this according to a member of Congress who was there.
Without objection, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a statement relating to a challenging of the claims of progress in Afghanistan that I issued 2 days ago.
Objection, so ordered.
Okay, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Michigan. Mr.
Gentleman
Conyers.
from Michigan is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a senior member of the Judiciary Committee on the floor with me, the gentleman from California, Mr. Berman. I don't see any other members on, but this is an important matter for the Judiciary Committee in that Article 1, Section 8 says only Congress has the right to declare war. Obviously, we haven't declared war in a very, very long time. And so I think that we have to find out what is the constitutional basis that we're operating in. Well, I'll skip Iraq. We all know that that was based on false information promulgated from the President of the United States. But now getting to Afghanistan, we find that we have a resolution dating back to September 14, 2011, a use of force resolution. But that has expired by any rational investigation of it. It was designed to respond to the 9/11 terrorist attack and to fight Al-Qaeda. But today we're in Afghanistan on a long-term effort of rebuilding the nation. Nation building is unrelated to that original resolution. And now we're in Afghanistan, an unlawful incursion into Pakistan. And so, could I get a little more time?
I'll yield the gentleman an additional half minute.
Gentleman's recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
And so now we're in Pakistan, and the CIA is operating covert combat activities there, and those are unlawful. We're violating the UN Charter, which we are supposed to be a leader in. And so the Obama administration is carrying on the same military operations of its predecessor.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from California.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, may I inquire about how much time is remaining on the time allotted to me?
Gentleman has 22 minutes remaining.
I would like to take 8 of those 22 minutes and yield and ask that that be yielded to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Burton.
Without objection,
I
gentleman is recognized for 8 minutes.
I thank the gentleman.
To the committee.
To the majority.
To the majority.
Of the committee. Mr. Burton is now controlling the time for that majority.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I now.
I didn't say these 8 minutes.
Does the gentleman from California reserve his time?
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about one point. The majority party, that part of the majority party that is urging the same position I am on this resolution, which is a no vote, has made the argument a number of times that when you're dealing with fundamental issues of national security, you spend money even under difficult times, a point that I have no disagreement with. And they argue the issue of what the alternatives will be and the potential for providing new safe havens for terrorists, or more safe havens for terrorists, or a return of Afghanistan as a safe haven for terrorists if we pass this resolution. And I don't disagree with that point. But what I find upsetting about the majority's position is their denial of the fundamental point. They quote General Petraeus for every position that they find philosophically and factually satisfying, and ignore General Petraeus and Secretary of Gates on the fundamental concept of how we hope to change the course of what's happening in Afghanistan, because if we don't change it, then we have to come and address the fundamental question of what we're doing there through a counterinsurgency strategy. So we talk about clear and hold and build, and it is the military jobs to clear and for a time to hold. But build is fundamentally a civilian program, and General Petraeus over and over again has said this conflict in Afghanistan that cannot be won unless we strengthen the governance of a very flawed government in Afghanistan, unless we provide economic opportunities and for that society to progress and win the hearts and minds of the people of Afghanistan to the cause for which we are fighting. And it's also a view of Afghanistan as if it's isolated from the rest of the world. I can go through countries around the world, failed states, nearly failing states, terrible problems, which are certainly becoming safe harbors for terrorism. And so when the same party that makes a strong case for our national security interests here at the same time passes legislation which slashes every aspect of efforts to strengthen governance and development assistance and to provide the kinds of opportunities that serve our national security interests, I find it a strange kind of logic and a flaw in their approach to this. I understand the economic hardships we have, and if one wanted to look at the foreign assistance budget and take specific things that aren't working and get rid of them, I understand that. And if one wanted to make proportional cuts in foreign assistance budget, but to come with the argument of we're broke, we got to cut spending, and then disproportionately focus on that aspect of our national security strategy, which will do a tremendous amount and will be fundamental to any effort to stop there from being safe harbors for terrorism, and that is to massively slash disproportionately foreign assistance. It's a terrible mistake. It terribly undermines the national security strategy that we're trying to achieve through our operations and our presence and the money we're spending in Afghanistan. It's not thinking, I think, as clearly as needs to be thought, and I'd urge those in the majority to think again about how much of the cuts that we need to make should be coming from that part of the budget that constitutes 1% of the federal budget. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that could present for the record the latest quote from Mr. Karzai that I'd like to read. The gentleman from California, I have great respect for him in many, many ways. We talk about we got to, enhance the governance of Afghanistan. Well, this is his quote, March 12, 2001. I've read it before, but I want to submit it for the record. I request that NATO and America should stop these operations on our soil. Karzai said, this war is not on our soil. If this war is against terror, then this war is not here. Terror is not here. I reserve the balance of my time.
And reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Griffin, the Vice Chair of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Europe and Eurasia, and an Iraq War veteran who continues to serve as a major in the U.S. Army Reserve.
Gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition to H-Conres 28 because it would undermine our national security and our ability to keep us safe right here at home. I understand that many Americans are frustrated with the length of this war. I also understand the American people have demanded the U.S. government get its fiscal house in order. I know we cannot afford to fund this war indefinitely, but some think that cutting and running immediately from Afghanistan is a solution. That's simply not an option. This is a reckless resolution. We've made progress in Afghanistan, and we cannot afford to abandon that progress by immediately withdrawing our troops. What we must do, however, is demand that our military and civilian leaders set clear and definable goals for our military efforts in Afghanistan. We also must listen to our military commanders who are there on the ground, day in and day out. General Petraeus has testified to our military's substantial progress in impeding the Taliban's influence and increasing the number of Afghan security forces. He cautioned, however, that this recent success is fragile and reversible. We must allow our troops to remain in Afghanistan to defeat the Taliban and al-Qaeda so that we can keep Americans safe here. We must continue to train and support local security forces because this will bring about the safe and successful transition of the country's security to the Afghan people. To withdraw now, to withdraw immediately, would be to forfeit that progress and allow the Taliban footing in Afghanistan. We must honor the men and women of our armed forces who have fought so hard. We must honor the men and women of the international armed forces who have fought so hard, and honor the men and women of the Afghan forces who have fought hard to defend their own country. They have sacrificed so much. We cannot abandon them now. Most importantly, it is not in our national interest to do so. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentlewoman from Florida reserve her time?
Yes, sir, I do, and I would like to thank Mr. Berman for giving us 8 minutes of his time, and I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentlewoman reserves her time. Gentleman from Ohio.
Could I ask, Mr. Speaker, how much time each group here has?
Gentlewoman from Florida controls 22 minutes. Gentleman from Ohio controls 22 minutes. Gentleman from California controls 9 1/2 minutes. And the gentleman from North Carolina controls 16 minutes.
I yield myself 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Members of this House are talking about cutting $100 billion from the budget. Well, we can trim the federal budget of more than $100 billion in out-of-control spending. Members have been very concerned about out-of-control spending. They're calling for a reduction in the federal budget. Cutting spending on the war in Afghanistan would solve their concerns. Spending on the war is greater than the minimum amount of federal spending certain members believe must be cut from the budget for fiscal responsibility. In the fiscal year 12 budget request, the President has requested $113.4 billion to continue the war. In fact, congressional appropriations of over $100 billion for the Afghanistan war are the rule in recent years, and as we've seen, there's talk of extending this war for another 10 years. $1 trillion, perhaps? Spending on the Afghanistan war has increased much faster than overall government spending in recent years. Consider a comparison of the average annual rates of growth of government spending versus the Afghanistan war spending, 2008 through 2011. I yield myself 10 more seconds. Overall government spending has increased 9%, 2008 through 2011, but Afghanistan war spending has increased 25%. You want to save $100 billion, then vote for this resolution. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Filner.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, ASEAN consent to revise and extend.
The gentleman is recognized.
And Mr. Kucinich, I thank you for your courage in bringing this debate to the floor. It's like the 600-pound elephant in the nation. This war is going on, and we never discuss about it. And I want to applaud the courage of Mr. Jones, North Carolina. He has taken more than a lot of grief from his own party, and he has stood up to that with a courage that is admirable, and we all admire you, Mr. Jones. I want to look at this debate, my colleagues, from the point of view of the former chairman of the Veterans Committee, which I had the honor to serve. Mr. Kucinich, I think you underestimate the cost of this war. to be, you know, I've never seen you so conservative, Mr. Kucinich. I had a hearing last year before the Veterans Committee in which Nobel Prize-winning economist Joe Stiglitz testified. He said these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are a $5 to $7 trillion war over the course of their being carried out. And let us not forget, and that's not calculated in your savings, Mr. Kucinich, the veterans. Those who have served in this war with great courage, great professionalism. Treating these veterans costs hundreds of billions of dollars more. And we're not considering that when we talk about ending this war. You know, we've been told that there are about 45,000 casualties in these two wars in the last 10 years. Then why have almost 1 million people showed up at the Veterans Administration hospitals for war-related injuries? 1 million. This is not a rounding error. This is a deliberate attempt to misguide us on the cost of this war. This war is costing, in addition to what the budget said, tens and even hundreds of billions more for treating our veterans. We must calculate that into the cost of this war. When you guys say deficit and debt, we're going to say Afghanistan. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired.